Hey there everybody, this is Killin' Cat, but you can call me Patrick. Trust me, it's okay, everyone does. At this point, it might be becoming obvious to you guys that I'm harsher on AAA studios than I am on indie studios. I think that's fair, especially from really big companies with a lot of money. And, on that topic, today, Pikmin 4. Oh man, this is great. It is a new Pikmin game, and it is so exciting. This is a borderline once-in-a-decade experience, maybe twice in a decade, for any hardcore fans of the series that just wait for the next entry. Fists clenched, pumping in the air. And if you guys are new to my channel, I do Pikmin 2 mods and Pikmin 2 mod reviews, and I've played every Pikmin game except for Hey Pikmin at this point. I also play Pikmin 1 every year. It's an annual Let's Play for me, just because I can. Well, this year was a long play, but that's just because I didn't have the time. I digress. As you might guess, Pikmin 4 is right up my alley. It's meant to be very much like Pikmin 2. Now the real question is though, how well does it hold up as a brand new entry? It just came out. It's the most modern game I've done on my channel ever, since I mostly dedicate myself to playing older or more obscure titles. This is also a bit different in a way because I have done 2 playthroughs instead of 1 for this. This is because Pikmin games aren't typical in a way that you get the most out of it your first time playing. They're typical in the way that the more you play it, the better you get. The faster you beat it, the more fun it is. Pikmin games are a speedrunner's paradise, and honestly, it's the only game series I've ever speedrun in, and probably the only one I will ever speedrun unless a Pikmin-like game crops up and is really good. So the more you play, and the more you learn and adapt, the more satisfying it is to play the game. So I did 1 first-time playthrough, and I came back for a second playthrough for the long play, which is now up on my channel. This is where I plug that you guys can join my channel for 99 cents and get all my videos early, because that is a thing I do, and I like to do it. And supporting me means I get to do this longer. My thoughts for the spoiler-free review now, and then the spoilered review after. This is an amazing game, and a great entry into the Pikmin series, even if it's a bit too easy and held up by a poor narrative design. It is, however, a great entry point into the series. I do also want to say that the narrative isn't bad, just that it interrupts the gameplay too much for a large portion of your playtime. And skipping scenes might wind up with you not knowing what to do if it's your first time through. There's issues with very poorly balanced combat as well, but this is a fun game, and it's at least worth a shot. During my second playthrough, I had way more fun than the first, so after you beat the game once, give it another go. You'll probably have a better time. This is especially true with Pikmin 4, since it only seems difficult on the surface. Or maybe you don't want to. This first playthrough for you is going to be over 30 hours long, usually, so I can't blame you. The second time is faster by about 10 or so hours, at least for me, because you don't have to deal with the issues you know how to avoid, and you don't have to listen to the story anymore. The only holdup for a second playthrough would be those loading screens that move at Mach -1. It was really fun showing this game to my wife too, but she got so annoyed with the narrative she actually stopped watching and mentally tapped out. I had to bring her to more than once and ask her if she wanted to engage. The answer was typically yes, but then she'd burn out again. Sometimes it was a no, and I understand that, full stop. Later on in the review, I go on to describe the level of hand-holding the game does for you as lobster claw-like, which is what burnt my wife out more than anything else, because the tutorials oftentimes connect directly to the story, so if you want to understand what's going on, you can't skip them. And there's a chance the game will repeat tutorials to you more than once, unnecessarily. And for older fans of the series, some features from older games do actually need unlocking in this game. That's not entirely new, but the way they do it here is a little bit egregious. I still had a lot of fun with it, but it's a bit problematic. That's it for the spoiler-free review. The full review takes up from here on. Sometimes I will be describing how my wife reacts because she also loves Pikmin, and I do ask for her input on how she feels about things. Let's get one thing out of the way right away. This game doesn't retcon any other games. It's in an alternate timeline of the events of Pikmin 1 and 2, of which you get both games in one here. That's pretty similar to how they put Pikmin 1 and 2 on the Switch as well, but you only get the Pikmin 1 story around the halfway point of this game. I would have much preferred to have it unlocked way earlier, as you get drip-fed the story until you unlock it in its entirety. Also, the new timeline Pikmin 1 segment has the issue where Olimar discovers the caves, but then you actually play the segment and he does not discover the caves. I'm surprised that's a plot hole people haven't pointed out yet. Like, Olimar crash lands back into the planet, then his life support systems fail, and he becomes a leafling. He has no time to discover the caves. You play his entire story segment. That doesn't make any sense to me. It would have also been cool to just have this unlocked from the start, or maybe after you get it on one of your save files, it's available on the main menu forever, but no, you have to load up your save file and go talk to Olimar. That's really bad. You guys, you could have done better, especially since the main menu is so empty. What'd you want to do, show off that screensaver space? Everything you like about Pikmin 2 is back in this game, and also everything people disliked, and then sometimes they change things people liked and hated to add a cherry on the top for decisions that would feel weird. I never really understood the hate for Pikmin 2. It's a really fun game, and it has its issues, but it doesn't deserve all the dislike it gets. Yeah, it's not Pikmin 1 again, and that's fine. We need new things. And it's a great introduction to the series with no stressors of a time limit. Which, for everyone I talked to, that was the main reason they didn't play Pikmin 1. The time limit was too stressful. Pikmin 4 operates roughly the same in that regard as well. Of course, when I say everything people dislike, I do mean that. Let's get into the gameplay now. Well, after the hours of narrative. Why is the narrative so in your face? The tutorials sometimes interrupt gameplay multiple times within seconds of each other. I would take 5 steps and get a new scene, and then take another few steps and get another scene, and then another scene after another few steps, and I would beg them to shut up. I'm not kidding. During my initial playthrough of this game, there are multiple times in my commentary where I just beg the game to shut up and let me play. Yes, it is that bad. It interrupts you so much. It's painful. To make it worse, Pikmin 3 kind of fixed this issue, but then they just roll that back for Pikmin 4. You'd have little pop-ups on screen that give you dialogue and tell you what to do sometimes without interrupting everything or stopping it. Now, Pikmin 3 did do that a lot too, but it wasn't near as bad as Pikmin 4 is. And yes, since this is a spiritual successor to Pikmin 2, that game did it as well. But not near as much as this. There's maybe twice in this game where it actually lets you experiment and doesn't clasp onto your hand like an angry lobster grasping for life. I wish that was a joke. I would sometimes have 2 or 3 back-to-back scenes, maybe up to 4, that were all between 5 and 15 minutes, sometimes cutscenes, sometimes tutorials, but they all intertwine with each other. You'll also be getting tutorials well until around the 20-hour mark of the game, which is only made worse if you have to retry a day or an action, as those tutorials will repeat themselves. Now this is, of course, on your first playthrough. On your second playthrough, you may only be getting tutorials 12 hours into the game, but that's still 12 hours into the game you're getting tutorials. It makes every single character and gameplay aspect feel non-organic too. It's all very clearly manufactured for you to have a very specific experience. Sure, every game does have characters tell you how to play the game directly with button controls. It's a fundamental aspect of the series, but with several interruptions to start the game off, and then 2 to 3 interruptions to start off every day sometimes multiple times in a row, it starts to be less character dialogue and more of an annoyance. This burnt me out so bad I couldn't bring myself to speak to most of the characters afterwards either, both because of these scenes and constant interruptions and the fact that dialogue has a 1 to 2 second delay before you can move on from that dialogue box specifically. Chats at base camp can take just as long as the tutorial segments because of these delays and depending on how long characters want to jabber on, and it's really unappealing. And that's really sad to me because I was very excited to have all these characters to talk to that people unfortunately spoiled me on. But hey, all that spoiler did was serve to hype up the game for me. I was really excited for that. But the point of this is, every single dialogue action further and continuously delays you from actually experiencing the game, and it's sad. Now this 1 to 2 second delay of dialogue occurs even within tutorials and cutscenes. So you're going to be delayed like this no matter what. I understand why they did that, to make sure people don't skip on from things they could want to see or read, and this game has the most narrative of any Pikmin game. Every game has had something like this, however the extent it happens in this game, I never wanted to be bothered again. In all prior games, this kind of interruption never happened as frequently, or if it did, it often brought forth useful information to a new player or a refresher if you spent too long away. As much as I enjoy the characters and the character dialogues, I found myself so frustrated with the slowness of progression during my first playthrough. So much so, I wanted to skip through the story, even though I do think it's actually pretty well written. And the character dialogues are actually fun outside of the tutorials. I don't think any other game in recent history has made me dislike tutorial music so much just based on how much it happens. Whenever I hear the tutorial music of Pikmin 4, I wince and get frustrated, and that's just from contact with the music to my ears. Yes, you can skip them every single scene by pressing the plus button and holding it down, but if you do, you might just not know what's going on, unless you rewind the day to do the same thing again. There's still the chance the game might tell you the same thing again several more times before it's done with you, and you might skip these and not realize these tutorialized scenes contain more narrative and sometimes advance the plot. That's a pretty huge issue, yeah, especially since the narrative is genuinely quite good, all things considered. I rather liked my time with this game, but since I wanted outside opinion, I had to ask others for their inputs. Most people expressed a heavy dissatisfaction with this element as well, though my wife stood out the most. I asked her during my second playthrough what she thought of the game, if it was good, and she unironically asked me, "What game?" Followed by the statement, as I looked a bit confused, "It keeps interrupting you, so I can't tell if there's a game or if it's any good." I didn't really consider the story and gameplay as separate elements when I asked the question, but it was refreshing to hear a more explaining answer for what other people will experience with this title. This issue is further compounded by the absurdly long loading screens, which I suppose is a good transition into the graphics, as those are most likely directly connected with this issue. I don't normally give much to graphics, maybe a footnote, and I say if the game is pretty or not. No, I have to give a show to this because the loading times are simply inexcusable. Depending on the size of the current map you're on, for the overworld, loading screens can take anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute long, and at one point I think I had a minute-and-a-half loading screen. Most times the caves you enter will take 15 to 30 seconds to load in, depending on the size of the cave floor you're on. But sometimes I've had cave floors take up to 50 seconds to spawn in, and I don't know why. While those loading times aren't particularly bad, especially compared to some titles like Pokemon Platinum, they are still not good because they cut any tension or any flow of the gameplay you've had with a knife. Everyone's opinion on how this loading time works is going to be different because some people grew up with a PlayStation 3 and some people didn't. These aren't the worst loading times I've experienced in a game, but they are pretty bad. Now, this game is absurdly pretty, but I don't think the game being this pretty warrants the loading times. I would have much preferred a game that loads faster and doesn't look this good. The load times cut all tension and pull you out of the experience the game is offering. I'm not kidding when I say during the game's opening segments, the narrative and loading times were so long I made and ate a meal all while still giving commentary, because I had enough space between commentary to actually make and eat lunch. Yeah, it's that bad. There's no excuse for it either. Yes, the game is absolutely beautiful and probably the most beautiful Switch title to date, which is subjective, mind you, but it's just not worth it to have loading times this long. That's not an issue with the Switch either, mind, because loads of astonishingly beautiful games exist on the system. Why does this one take so long then? Is it because of some sort of hard-coded anti-piracy measure in there to check during loading screens and verify the data is unmodded? I could see that, as recently the Pikmin 2 modding scene has become huge, and this is somewhat Nintendo's counter to the modding scene, a true follow-up to Pikmin 2's gameplay. But I also doubt this because there's already Pikmin 4 mods out made by Gunnaden and some others. I simply cannot fathom why the loading screens are as they are. It's so excessive and unnecessary. But on that note, we can finally move on to the rest of the gameplay. Yes, the gameplay is amazing. This is another Nintendo title where the gameplay outweighs the game's narrative, though this time it's just because the narrative is so annoying in its repetition, telling you the obvious and in-your-face lobster claw handholding. Look, you can enjoy this, and I'm not gonna stop you, it's fine to do so, but it is inarguably interruptive to the gameplay, which is the primary selling point of the series. For some reason it feels like Zelda and Pikmin swapped for their most recent titles, and that's super weird. Speaking of that lobster claw level hand-holding and optimization of gameplay, this game actually has a ton of improvements I wanted Tears of the Kingdom to have. depending on if they actually update the game or have DLC for it. One major improvement is the allowance of button remapping in the menu. This isn't done on the Switch main menu, I mean in the game itself. You can pause the game with the plus button or was it the minus button at any time and remap the buttons. No, it is not a complete button remapping of every single button, only the shortcuts. But that is still insanely useful, which means they absolutely could do this in Tears of the Kingdom and they just didn't. That is a huge complaint I see a lot of people have, and I feel kind of validated here. Now sure, you can go back into the Switch's main menu and remap every single button manually to do whatever you want, but that does remap it for every single game. And unless you have a perfect control scheme for you, that's a little bit excessive. Still, what Pikmin 4 does is one step closer to being able to remap any button on this. And the Switch main menu option is still very useful, if a bit very tedious. It's even more useful if you only play a handful of games on the Nintendo Switch anyways. But there's also the fact that Pikmin 4 manages to make use of every single button on the Nintendo Switch, including the power off button if you get mad at being told the same thing for the 5th time. Yes, that is a joke, and it is a bit mean, but it's also true. Pikmin 4 really does manage to use every button on the Switch to its maximum. Obvious sarcastic humor aside, not every Switch title does that, so it's a nice thing to see. The gameplay itself is as good as always, with some advancements to the system I hope to see return in the future, including inventory. However, one thing I hate is the purchasing of upgrades. Not because the purchasing of upgrades themselves is bad, but because some basic mechanics from previous entries are locked behind having to buy them. But at least for those, you don't get the interruptive tutorial system for them. How do you purchase these upgrades? Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but for now I have more to say. There are upgrades that are insanely useful, especially some of the newer ones, since those upgrades are actually returning features you have to buy as upgrades. Yeah, that's the new aspect about them. Most things are pretty much the same. You absolutely need every upgrade except for one to complete the game without otherwise grinding, and that is a huge improvement from Pikmin 2, as you needed to grind up to a certain amount of Pikmin from a certain Pikmin type in the most unnatural way, and it clearly existed to just prolong the game. What feels bad about this, however, is sometimes upgrades that were one-time upgrades in a prior entry that got you all the way to the max right away are now divvied up into 1 to maybe 3 or 4 tiers. I guess they really did need to space out the gameplay a bit, because otherwise you'd have everything upgraded really quickly, or things would be absurdly expensive with the current system they have, but why didn't they just rework it a little bit? Either way, grinding is typically not a thing here, unless you want it to be that way for nostalgic purposes. I'd say the new system, including Ochi, the space dog you have, are put to great use. You have a genuine reason for a good portion of the upgrades, and I'd say all of the upgrades for your rescue pup, except for the last one you get, as it's entirely pointless by the time you get it. Also, most of the elemental resistance upgrades for Ochi are useless, with the only exception being the fire one, as it's needed to get the onion for the ice Pikmin. Actually, that might not be true. I don't know what speedrunners are up to. There's also that, unfortunately, some upgrades you won't be getting until post-game, and you really need those before post-game for them to have any use. After you beat the game, you don't really have a point in getting these. I'm not saying you unlock them at post-game either, mind. No, you have to buy every other upgrade to get them, or complete various other side quests. And then some you only get after beating the main story in its entirety to near 100%. At that point, I'd already nearly 100% the game in the typical way you'd play these titles. So when you finally get them, if you play it in the classical Pikmin style, they're useless to your progression. And like I said, some of them only unlock after you've beat the game, so they're useless then too. They're also going to be useless for continuing to play the game, since very little respawns and nothing ever needs to be rebuilt in the game. Though I suppose maybe you're supposed to beat the main story first, then come back for the rest, but I got so burnt out on that narrative just being pushed so much, and the lobster claw level handholding, that I just wanted nothing to do with the narrative at that point. I just wanted to actually play the game, because like I said, the gameplay by itself is amazing. Now, to get to upgrades, you have to progress about an hour or two into the first area, depending on how fast you are, and exchange them for raw materials with Russ, the Rescue Corps scientist. Raw materials are these little blue crystals that are actually like clay or clay, and can be molded into a ton of shapes and take on a ton of forms. I don't entirely know how they do this. They say when heated up or something. It is clay, so I suppose that's not unreasonable. Color me a bit skeptical, but I don't think you can make bombs that explode into fire just from clay alone, or explode into ice, or make organic paralytic carrots. But I do guarantee eating enough clay will paralyze anyone. Don't do it. Anyways, moving on to the Pikmin themselves. In this game, you start off only being able to have 20 Pikmin at a time, and must collect Flarlick to upgrade by 10 each. At first the system was a nuisance to me, but I actually began to enjoy it, as it allowed me to have a decent feeling of progression and masked up some of the game's other flaws. The developers did also take into consideration each player might not get every early Flarlick in the game and put 2 in each area. This doesn't mean you get over 100 Pikmin. Once you get 8 Flarlicks, you get Nectar and Spicy Spray as a reward for transporting Flarlicks back to the onion still. As a reward for transporting back extra onions, however, you just get 20 more Pikmin of that type in the onion. That's pretty useful, but I don't think you're gonna need to worry about that too much. However, you're almost never going to need more Spicy Spray, as the game overloads you on it in the final dungeon. You could enter with none and come out with over 20 possibly. The Pikmin types are the same as always, but this time every type returns. Yes, this includes purple and white Pikmin as well, and if you do the challenge mode for the game, you even get onions as rewards for beating the game's hardest challenges. Yes, onions for the purples and whites. I use hardest loosely because there's a pretty big issue with how this game's challenges work. See, they're not hard as much as they are a task of memorization, which is worth noting since this is a gameplay successor to Pikmin 2. This game does remove essentially all randomization. I know there wasn't a ton in Pikmin 2, but it did exist. The entire game is pattern seeking, even in the challenge mode, so there's a very specific pattern you're expected to go in with only a little bit of variety. You end up repeating these challenge mode levels close to 10 times here and there, with the most lenient being twice, and one of them you don't have to repeat at all if you know what's coming. Actually, technically 2, because on my second playthrough I steamed through 2 of them instead of just one of them. Because these aren't really actually a challenge of your skill. I mean, they are, but it's more so how good you are at the game versus how good your memorization skill is. They're closer to a challenge of how well you memorize things and what goes where and how, which is just what we all hated about the American school system, so it has no right to be so enjoyable. That is a kind of rewarding in of itself, but that doesn't make it hard any more than it makes it mentally tasking in a stressful way, because there is an exact way to play and you're expected to get it. And you have to get these to platinum to 100% this. If you're not a completionist, you can settle for whatever way you handle them, take your time to learn the patterns and get through them. Just have patience. All you need is a silver or a gold. You can even settle for a bronze if you just so desperately want to get those onions instead. Right, the challenges are technically Dandori battles, which is the 2-player battle mode and challenge modes that were in the prior game. The prior game being Pikmin 2 specifically. Pikmin 3 did have a similar game mode, but it's not quite the same, and Pikmin 4 hits those Pikmin 2 notes way closer than Pikmin 3 managed to, I think. Now I can get back onto describing the types of Pikmin in greater detail. Reds, yellows, and blues all work pretty much the same. Blues do have a slight bit of betterment to them because water is way deeper and way prettier in this game than previous entries, and so you can't really take on a lot of enemies with other types of Pikmin just from the edge of the water anymore. Water hazards and electric hazards are also better placed, and some enemies are better balanced to let yellow Pikmin get a little bit more time in the limelight. Though if they are your favorite type, not much has changed for them, so don't get your hopes up. For anyone new to the game, red Pikmin are resistant to fire and very good at fighting as they have a 1.5 times damage multiplier. Yellows are resistant to electricity, and blues can swim and are resistant to water. That is everything you need to know about them. Well, that and yellows get thrown really high, but I didn't find myself using that much, especially when I got winged Pikmin. That being said, pink Pikmin are here, which are the winged Pikmin, and they are almost as good as blue Pikmin, if not better, and they can take the place of yellow Pikmin with the exception of destroying barriers that are electric in almost any situation. Rock Pikmin are here as well, so take a bunch of them and charge at an enemy and watch their health bar go from 100 to 0 like an unfortunate car accident where the only victim is an Emperor Bulblax. Rock Pikmin really serve almost no other points. I don't recall any instances of me finding them particularly useful in the story, which is a shame because all this game actually has is a story mode and a Dandori battle mode, which is one you can play with friends in case anyone is curious. It's fun, you should give it a chance. Seriously though, the amount of walls to shatter or enemies that are particularly affected by Rock Pikmin are almost none. I think there's one enemy type in the game that's particularly affected by Rock Pikmin. Yes, including the giant enemy crab that is in HD, because it can now have its claw destroyed by any Pikmin type. And there's pretty much no crystal walls to break down in the entire game except for Dandori battles, and you can skip most Dandori battles if you just don't want to partake in them. Now, I have to go for that 100%. As I did say, White Pikmin make their first return to a story mode since 2004, and 19 years have passed. There's almost no point to them anymore. I don't even think I used them as fodder if I was having a bad time, which I don't think I even had a bad time at all. They are certainly very fast and great for harvesting the spicy berries to give speed and attack buffs to all your Pikmin, but you can do that with any Pikmin well enough by the final area. They're not even the only Pikmin that can detect and dig up deeply buried treasures anymore. Any Pikmin can do that. It is cool they're here, but I don't suppose Nintendo could have balanced them a bit better against Ice Pikmin, which are way better to use. And way better to sacrifice because you can possibly get more spicy spray out of it. I'm saving some Pikmin for last, so here are Glow Pikmin. They are a ghost Pikmin type that I saw in a weird fan video from the year 2011. Yes, I watched those too. Glow Pikmin are just Bulbmin with another special trait, and they're the only type of Pikmin you can use during nighttime missions as they glow in the dark. Other Pikmin types don't want to follow you marching into the darkness of the planet during night, and for good reason. Because everything is a demonic entity bent on destroying anything nearby. They do specifically like to attack Luminols, which are the termite or ant mounds where the Glow Pikmin live. Also, Glow Pikmin can't die. They return to being particles of light and go back to the Luminols, where you can then replenish their numbers and theoretically get the same little photons back in shape. At least I like to think so. Glow Pikmin don't follow you back to base though, and can only be out in caves and at night. They don't have an onion either, but they do have a charge attack that stuns enemies, and it operates like a flashbang or Krillin's solar flare. They then proceed to shoot the enemy. Wait, no, they don't do that, they just beat them to death. I saved Ice and Purple Pikmin for last as they're the most egregious changes to the formula. This doesn't mean those Pikmin are bad, it just means they're very unbalanced. Ice Pikmin have technically adopted the Purple Pikmin stun ability, but it has a wind-up time. If you don't care about the enemy corpses or getting more Pikmin, then just use the Ice Pikmin. Well, not just the Ice Pikmin, they do terrible damage against frozen opponents. Maybe mix it in with some Red or Rock Pikmin. See, what they do is after maybe a few seconds of beating up the enemy and doing enough damage to them, it freezes them solid. From there, you can shatter the enemy into a million little pieces. Ice Pikmin, like I said, don't do a lot of damage themselves, but they're effectively capable of killing every enemy in the game, with the exception of the Water Wraith by themselves. Yes, even the final boss. This replaces the Ultra Bitter Spray as well, but it's even more broken because you can do it infinitely on any enemy that isn't icy themselves, as they have the elemental resistance to ice if that wasn't obvious. But with 60 or more Pikmin, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Now, Purple Pikmin might be fixed, you think, because their stun ability has gone away. But no, quite the opposite. They did the Pikmin 251 way of countering this. See, they took away the stunning, for sure, but they buffed their regular attacks, and if thrown fast enough, they far outweigh the damage Rock or Red Pikmin could do over time, especially since they have no recovery period unlike Rock Pikmin. And if buffed by the very easy to get Spicy Spray, they can chew through an enemy's health within seconds. Now pair up 60 purples or rocks with 40 Ice Pikmin. Definitely for the final boss, exchange either of those types for at least 5 yellow Pikmin in some way. There you go, you entered easy mode. And speaking of the final boss, I only had trouble with it my first time around. The second time around, my wife pointed out how trivial it is. But keep in mind that was my second playthrough. This game series is really easy as is, but now it's way easier. Also, yes, you do need 100 purple Pikmin, and they do still carry 10 times the amount of a normal Pikmin. That is easy to accomplish thanks to that purple onion, and well worth the grind. It would be a lot easier if the good people at Nintendo didn't decide that enemies don't respawn unless they're in caves. No enemy on the overworld ever respawns, except maybe butterflies. Even then, enemies only respawn once you've entirely completed a cave. This game already offers very little in the way of challenge and a lot in the way of fun, so why not add some road bumps for me to hit? Just a little bit here and there, because this game feels genuinely so empty. I can't begin to describe the feeling other than saying that it's empty. Why not let us see the enemies in the overworld more than once? They could respawn and just take forever to do so, but I have no reason to wait that long. I went 50 in-game days, come on now. And because of this, the game becomes way easier. Every enemy is beaten with charging or ice Pikmin, so maybe respawning was turned off because this would make that issue much more glaring and allow the player to figure out the problems with the combat mechanic much faster. But all that did is briefly smooth over the problem that they couldn't figure out how to balance after 22 years. Counting the first game, of course, in that measurement. This isn't a minor issue either. Inevitably, if you pay enough attention to the gameplay, you'll come across this. If you want to avoid it, of course you can, but why do you have to consciously avoid breaking the game in your favor since the very first title? I love all of these games, but every single one can be broken fairly easily and quickly. I think Pikmin 1 is the one that is the least broken in terms of combat, but Pikmin 3 introduced Rock Pikmin, whom are invulnerable to the final boss and make it entirely trivial as well. Then again, at the end of the day, maybe I only use purple Pikmin so much because they're needed for that 100 Pikmin treasure. Right next to blue Pikmin, they are my favorite Pikmin type. Second place is still silver, but they have a glaring flaw that isn't simple as removing their stuns or their damage buffs. I enjoy them as they are, and I'm just pointing out that they're unbalanced, and in their current way, there's no way to properly balance them. The best way to balance purple Pikmin or white Pikmin is just to remove them from the game, because otherwise you're removing key attributes to why they're so well remembered. While that is a shame to say, I keep them in my squad regardless of combat purposes simply because they're my favorite types of Pikmin to use. But if they didn't have such strong traits, I wouldn't have used them to begin with. I suppose they do fix this by having you only able to have 3 Pikmin types at a time, but what purpose does this really serve other than to take away player exploration? I mean, you're always going to bring certain types with you no matter what, and so little can actually kill your Pikmin, you don't have to worry very much about your progression. I know I didn't mention it very much, but yeah, you can only have 3 Pikmin types out at a time. This is different in caves where you can have as many as possible, but in the overworld, you're limited to 3 at a time, and when you bring them out of the cave, they go right back in the onion, and you are limited to, once more, 3 different types. Going into a cave, you also can only select from 3 different types of Pikmin. Sincerely, I didn't worry much throughout this game at all, and if something bad happened, I knew it was my fault because it could only be my fault because of how easy the game is. That's good though, it was a learning experience of what not to do. It was an experimentation thing that I praised earlier. Now, I do want to move on and say that modders have fixed the balancing issue for these types fairly recently, though they've been trying for some time. The first big attempt was Pikmin 251. Made by Pickhacker, where purple Pikmin were very rare and almost entirely unnecessary to the game, where it then created another issue by buffing the red Pikmin to the point of brokenness. This wasn't fixed entirely until Pikmin 269, where every type is very well balanced and useful, and they're all heavily reworked to have their own identity. And unlike in Pikmin 4, there's no simple solution for what Pikmin to bring with you. There's a lot of choices for battalions and their makeup. It's a super cool mod, and I do recommend it fully. But yeah, the game does only let you take out 3 Pikmin at a time, and it recommends you what Pikmin to take out, and in fact, it also defaults to what Pikmin to take out evenly distributed. So if the game thinks you need red and yellow Pikmin, it will recommend you take out 50 red and 50 yellow Pikmin, or however many you can take out, or however many you have, and it will fill out the rest with whatever recommended type has more. There's a good chance you'll ignore this and take in the Pikmin that you want anyways, and I wouldn't recommend that, but I also wouldn't recommend going with the recommendation since it distributes its best evenly. There's going to be quite a few instances where you might need a different amount of each type of Pikmin, and in some dungeons it might recommend you specific types, but you're going to need other types as well. It's not a perfect system, it is kind of an improvement, and I don't mind it much. It just doesn't matter if you're an experienced enough player. So if the combat has been fixed by fans, why doesn't Nintendo also fix it? This is a soft reboot, really. It's an alternate timeline where they are free to do whatever. So why didn't they change things? I love the Pikmin types we have, but the game is heavily broken in the player's favor to the point of incredible ease, and if you mess up, then it's entirely on you, and like I said, I liked that. There is the obvious answer that they brought them all back because it was a huge fan demand and it would make the game sell better, and it most certainly did. I can respect that, but I also feel a little bit robbed of a more challenging experience. Not robbed of a more challenging experience by them bringing the Pikmin types back, I want to clarify that right now, just that it could have been made a little bit differently, balanced a little bit differently so that it's not so heavily weighted in the player's favor. I see some excuses out there for this that it's for kids, but I argue against this. It's possible to make a game that is both challenging for kids and adults, but it's easier to make a game that is simple enough for everyone to get into. And they kind of hit just before the simple enough to get into. So much so that players that aren't good at this kind of game will definitely be able to jump into it and enjoy it, but players that have experience with this kind of game are going to enjoy it, they're just not gonna get any challenge out of it. Considering how much I've been playing Chibi Robo Park Patrol lately, I don't fundamentally think that's a bad thing. In fact, I think that can be a good thing. I just wish that there was a level of challenge that I could get invested in. Though that might be cut short by the loading screens. The other argument exists that this is for kids because of the art style, but if you've ever participated more in depth with the series, you'd know otherwise. People call this series a kiddie Nintendo series, but it's not really. There's a lot of darkness in the depths if you look for it, and even a good bit of learning to do. As example, every scientific name given to a creature is a real-life name in Latin, and you can also look into that, and you can find many similarities between the fictional creatures of the Pikmin series and many real-life animals. And that is still true of Pikmin 4, though not as much the new elemental enemies, which I guess are reasonable somewhat, but only to the fact that it is a video game. I'm not knocking that, mind, it's perfectly fine, and I really enjoy the new elemental enemy types. The gameplay itself propels you forward very naturally as well. You don't have to force yourself to do anything. You'll likely get it all without trying to force anything. That was probably the worst aspect of Pikmin 2, having to force yourself through some areas to grind or grab items back up when you go back through them because you had to escape because you ran out of Pikmin or something. But the monotony of that is entirely fixed in this title. Sure, it introduces its own issues by doing this, as every Pikmin game does, but overall, as an experience in games today, I found myself enjoying this game in spite of its flaws. That's likely because all the elements work so well together. Yeah, they're entirely broken in favor of the player if you think about your actions a bit, but at least you have to think. You could still lose if you're careless. And the narrative for the game genuinely makes me want to play more, as it has fewer of the issues that some of the more modern titles have on various consoles. The fact the narrative works so well with the game itself without contradicting or hurting existing lore in the series further boosts enjoyment. Yeah, I am very frustrated with the hand-holding and the constant interruptions, but those do diminish to the point of almost not happening by the time you're in the game's second half. You know, I just want to say, kids don't need this much hand-holding. Neither do adults, especially not adults. I remember from my childhood, as anecdote, there was a portion of Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door that I got stuck on. You might be thinking to yourself, there's no puzzles in that game, whatever could you have gotten stuck on? Do you guys remember the little riddle thing they give you on the tropical island where they tell you to hit the red statue 3 times and the blue statue 2 times? At least that's how I remember it in my head. It might be different in the game, but that's just the example. It took me literally a year and I was 9 levels off from the max level just because I could not figure out I needed to actually do what the guy was telling me to do. I know exactly why they made the system like they did, and it's because there are outliers like me who at times are really stupid. But by having this much handholding and having this much interruption to the gameplay, you're holding back other players from being able to have those aha moments, because I did have that moment when I finally figured it out. I was like, oh my god, I'm an idiot. I can't believe this took me so long. If people aren't allowed to experience those moments, they're never going to get better and improve those logicking skills. So inevitably, when they reach that kind of wall in a game again, they're not going to know what to do. It's going to take them significantly longer. That's going to be their introductory. That's going to be their aha moment. But it could be this title. And that's something really important to keep in mind. You need to know that your player might not understand everything, and that's fine. The most important part is they have a good time playing the game anyways. Because I guarantee you, if I did not have a good time with Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, I would not have spent a year trying to figure out a puzzle that wasn't actually even a puzzle. Like I said before though, it's about 20 hours of gameplay in before you finally stop getting those tutorials on your first time through. But it's so satisfying after that's finally done. I can't understate how thoroughly fun the gameplay is by itself. And that has been a long driving factor since the very first game in the series, in fact. The narrative has also always been there to help push it forward to some extent, though passively, with Hey Pikmin being the only exception to both of these rules because it had very little character or story developments. Also, the ending credits sequence makes me feel things, man. The music is amazing, and when Louie walks on screen at the end of it, chef's kiss right there. Actually, right, I haven't talked about the music yet. Well, have I? Maybe in passing. Well, it is Pikmin, so it is good music. It's no Sonic music here with rapid vibrancy and tunes to dance to, but every single theme introduced is really good, and some of the bosses even get new themes. Though they mostly end up reusing generic boss themes for almost everything, which is kind of a downgrade from Pikmin 2, but hey, for returning bosses, they actually do remaster their themes as well, so that's something to look forward to. Those sound pretty nice. Maybe they do remix them, but I am completely tone deaf to that. Pikmin will even sing some boss songs. That's a nice touch. If you have 100 blue Pikmin, or at least a majority blue Pikmin, maybe all blue Pikmin, they'll sing the Water Wraiths theme song. That's kind of wild, isn't it? I suppose it is time I talk about the main characters. I don't have a segue to this, so just deal with that. Colin is your most competent crewmate, doing everything on the ship that needs doing, and being an overall cool dude. He earns the least of my ire of all the crewmates because he is so well-mannered. The captain is the second speaking character you're introduced to, and she's a joke coward, but competent at keeping the team together, I suppose. I would say she keeps the team functioning, but that is clearly Colin. She also has this very weird eye for talent. Every member of the crew is very unique, and she herself picked them. She's also often the butt of jokes, and it feels wrong to have her that way since she's supposed to be what holds everyone together, but you just don't feel it at any point in the story. Russ is the Rescue Corps scientist. He only really cares about science and tolerates everything else. Or he is entirely oblivious to it. He's the character you buy upgrades from, which I did mention earlier. He obsesses over these upgrades and even wants praise for them. And honestly, yeah, he deserves it. Dingo is also a joke coward and a much more egregious one. He has some fun interactions, but I can't stand him. That one's on me. It's a personality thing. He's just so bad. He does, however, at least reward you for doing his job, but unless pushed into it, he generally avoids any conflict whatsoever, to the extent of damaging other crewmates. Dingo is also the only character that doesn't match up with the captain's expectations of them because he passes on every single one of his jobs to the new recruits, or does his best to pass on blame or pretend like nothing bad is actually happening. That might not seem bad, but his job is solo reconnaissance missions and apparently defending the rest of the team. He has a pretty big job, and I don't feel like he lives up to it. He does not give the character traits of it, but he has to be reliable in some way, right? If you got him as a second captain to play as, I could 100% believe it, and I thought it was going there for a little bit at first during my first playthrough, but no, they didn't do anything with him. Yanni is the doctor of the crew and the mad scientist version of the regular scientist that is Russ, because they just couldn't help themselves to make him like this. There's no other reason for him to have this character trait in any meaning whatsoever. It's still entertaining, it's just out of nowhere. He's sincerely waiting just for some health code violations where he can be like, I can fix it, and conduct a horrific science experiment. Yanni is also the one responsible for curing leaflings in the game's story, including Olimar, and all of the experiments that otherwise go on in the background that aren't connected to Russ. I would probably find Yanni to be the most enjoyable crewmate, but you always save the best for last. Bernard is the last crewmate you get back, and he is the pilot. He's loud, he's overly optimistic, he's overtly optimistic about everything. He's always thinking of the best possible outcomes, even in the worst situations. Absolutely the most fun character. He has the best interactions with Dingo, who abandoned him in a cave. Bernard is clueless as to his abandonment, or maybe he just thinks the best of Dingo, thinking Dingo was probably indisposed. This doesn't stop Dingo from being afraid about it, of course, because, you know, Dingo. Olimar and Louis actually come later on in the story, but they aren't technically crewmates. I will talk about them here, though. Even Shacho, which is the Japanese word for boss, is referenced, just not seen. Olimar and Louis are the original two explorers of Pikmin 2, though they have their own side quests and rewards in this game, separate from each other. Louis is cool to have, but if you already beat the game, you won't have any need for what he gives you for completion of a side quest. Olimar, however, is required for beating the challenges in the game. You know, the ones I mentioned before. Once you get Olimar back to base and heal him from being a leafling, you unlock the entire story mode of Pikmin 1 in this new timeline. Beating these gets you Moss's ability to swallow things for transportation, which Ochi does, thankfully not the captain themselves. Doing this does reveal that narrative plot hole I mentioned at the start, as Olimar had no way of finding the caves his first time around, and the loading screens are also significantly shorter for this mode, sometimes being seconds instead of up to more than a minute. As a summary for you guys, the plot hole is that Olimar couldn't find these caves. It's completely impossible, as he crashes into the planet and becomes a leafling after he first escapes and finds Moss on his ship. Then his life support systems fail and he gets turned into a leafling. There's no time for him to find all the caves on the planet he did or travel as far as he did. So the promotion of this plot hole, which is very huge and in your face, and it shows you the loading times don't need to be as long as they are, which I don't remember if I said, but the loading times for Olimar's Shipwreck's Tale are shorter than the base game's loading times for each area that he goes to. Now keep in mind, caves are separate loading screens. That's really bad, right? I can't excuse it, but the gameplay of this segment is also really fun. And I did want the moment of going back and playing Pikmin 1 the moment I started Pikmin 4, and Pikmin 4 satisfies that Pikmin 1 urge, to be able to play Olimar's story for this new timeline in full. And, well, they did that. And it didn't take 7 years to implement this time. I did hear people complain about Olimar being returning as a captain, and also that he doesn't return enough. Guys, he wasn't playable in the story of one game from 2013 and its port to a new console in 2020. And then they added a story mode for him in Pikmin 3 in the 2020 re-release. Guys, there's no point in complaining that Olimar isn't back enough. He's in every single game, and he's playable in every single game now. Yeah, I do wish he'd get more of a spotlight and more of his own story again, but what we have is actually really good, so I can't complain much. Just keep your fingers crossed. Maybe one day we'll get that new story for Olimar again. Yeah, you have to work for it in this game if you want to be able to play as him, but it is there. And the game is rewarding enough for anyone that wants to play as him that you'd naturally get there anyways. Olimar's Shipwreck's Tale is actually still very well paced despite the issues with it. Definitely better paced than the main story, and once more, the issues with it are very minor. I do think that it's fair to say at this point, fans of the series, new and old, have done a better job at keeping the series alive than Nintendo has. It's only a recent thing that all of the games are able to be played on the most recent Nintendo console, with the exception of Hey Pikmin. And it's only even more recent that Pikmin 3 feels complete with the deluxe version. Pikmin 4 feels like it's desperately missing something to make it whole, and that's a trend that started in 2013 with Pikmin 3. It was a thing in Hey Pikmin 2 where it felt like it was missing something. With how successful Nintendo currently is, I feel like that's going to be a continuing trend in the future. Games being released and then later on down the line being completed. Animal Crossing New Horizons did this too, where they added a bunch of content from older games in either as free updates or DLC. It's just a trend that's on the rise with the company, and it's not inherently a negative or a positive. I just wish that I would get the full game instead of having to wait for the full game. Especially for Pikmin, because we can go up to 10 years now without getting a new title. Well, a new traditional title. I'm not counting Hey Pikmin in that. It's not a traditional Pikmin game. Not that that's bad, It's just that it's not a traditional game that appeals to the main core audience. I also almost guarantee this game exists because of the Pikmin modding community. For those that don't know or are unaware in some way, shape, or form, Pikmin 2 modding has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger since the turn of the decade in 2020, sometimes with 3 or more mods releasing within a week. I literally can't keep up with the number of mods releasing. It's truly absurd the amount of content coming out. And it would be one that Nintendo would have to be willfully ignorant of to not capitalize on. It would also be hellish to end the modding scene with a DMCA, as those fans are the ones that kept the series alive long enough through this near-decade drought of almost no content. No matter how long we're told one of these titles is in development, it comes out when it's ready. But we also have to acknowledge the time gaps between games now, with Pikmin 1 coming out in 2001, Pikmin 2 in 2004, Pikmin 3 coming out in 2013, and Pikmin 4 coming out in 2023. It doesn't make this game bad for wanting to capitalize on the success of the modding scene, but they really didn't do enough after 10 years of waiting. Is that me being hard to please? I don't think so. I praise this as an amazing title that's loads of fun, it's just lacking in some regards. In that regard, the modding scene for these games is going to outlast Pikmin 4 because of all the changes to how progression works, loading times, and awkward narrative decisions. Pikmin modders such as Pikmin 2 Power Cut creator Nintendo Kluber, Pickhacker of Pikmin 251, and especially Umi of Pikmin 269 have far exceeded expectations of the fans by just making mods of games. There's even a 4K Ultra HD mod for Pikmin 1 and 2 now if you want the graphics this game has, and they're not hard to run. I guarantee you that a lot of these are going to be compatible with the Switch too one day, because Pikmin 1 and 2 were already on the console, and Pikmin 3 is here as well, and you also have Pikmin 4, and Pikmin 4, like I said, already has mods for it, so you're going to have a 4-in-1 package here. Now we just need Hey Pikmin. Look, I like to crap on that game as much as the next guy, but I did actually have a lot of fun playing it, even if it does have problems. My final thoughts on this game. Pikmin 4 needs downloadable content. Free downloadable content. It needs a patch to toggle on and off tutorials, and a hard mode. This is absolutely true of the title. Is it worth the $60 price point? I'd say yes. However, on my first playthrough, I felt empty and disappointed after beating the game. It wasn't satisfying because it had no challenge, and there is no challenge mode to get further challenge. Is this game fun? Yeah. Is it challenging? No. This game also follows the recent trend of feeling empty, and many people seem to think that's a feature. But why would a real-time strategy game want to feel so empty? Sure, I get that from Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, but this is a series based on having over 100 things on screen at once, just to show off processing ability. It fails at that too, by the way. There's never a lot going on screen, and they even cut down the amount of Pikmin you can start off to prolong gameplay structure. What purpose did Flarlick really serve? Sure, I liked the feature, but if you really think about it, it did nothing but extend gameplay by making it harder to accomplish goals and forcing you to take your time and come back, when it could have been more challenging instead. You could start with 100 Pikmin, and thanks to the new processing power, you could maybe get up to 200. That might not be able to return in later games due to changing of consoles, but that's fine. The enemies could have been way more dangerous this way, so getting 200 Pikmin would have helped a lot, meaning that you make use of the vast majority of the Flarlick just like before. Limiting you to 3 Pikmin types at a time is just pointlessly a time sink as well, and telling you what types to use in an area robs the player of exploring and planning they had in prior entries. You know exactly what's needed at all times. Of course, I'm not talking about caves. Those are always that way. You always knew what to bring in a cave with you. They just didn't tell you distinctly what you absolutely should and fill your party with that. Now keep in mind, I think the vast majority of these changes are good and for the better. A great way to introduce people to the series as well. But the modding scene has done better even for Pikmin 3. I know I don't talk about the Pikmin 3 modding scene much, but it is there and it's good too. I just don't have a good way to play those mods right now. Pikmin is a series kept alive almost solely by its fans. The theorists, the Let's Players, the modders, the reviewers, and those that go on to make full games based on the 5 entries in the series we have. You out there watching the video have done more to keep Pikmin alive as a series than Nintendo did for nearly 10 years. This isn't a bad game. It's worth your money. It's a good entry point to the series. but so is Pikmin 2 Power Cut, and I'd argue Pikmin 2 Power Cut is a better entry for the series than Pikmin 4. Pikmin 269 is for the more advanced players, and there's of course hard mode mods if you really like grinding your face against a wall. Pikmin 2 New Year is a less empty experience than Pikmin 4, and that's not saying Pikmin 2 New Year is empty, it's just saying that fans made a game that felt more full and vibrant with life than Pikmin 4 managed to have, because after you beat most of the enemies, you're just wandering vast, empty areas. It's amazing that this is the game that managed to take the place of Tears of the Kingdom on sales charts. Not that it's outsold Tears of the Kingdom, just that it managed to finally be the one that toppled the king. And I'm proud of the fan base for making that happen. This series deserves that, and this game deserves that. There's so much care and attention to detail in this title that I can't help but be happy to finally have it in my hands. Should you get this game? Absolutely. But also play mods for the older games when you run out of content, because you will. Because in all likelihood, Nintendo won't make another title for many, many years to come. And it once more falls on the fans' shoulders to keep the series alive and well. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you to Nintendo for finally giving us more in this series. And especially thank you, modders, for giving us what we deserve. I hope you all as fans go on to make the best of this type of game that can exist. I've seen you all get close with the mods, so I know you can do it. Believe in yourself, like I believe in you, and probably so many other people do too. You just don't know it yet. This is Patrick, and I'll see you guys in 10 years when we get Pikmin 4 rebooted. Check my Patreon and Ko-fi in the description below to support me, and join my channel for 99 cents a month to get my content sooner than the scheduled date for everyone else. It's amazing that this is the game that managed to take the place of Tears of the Kingdom on sales charts. Not that it's outsold Tears of the Kingdom, just that it managed to finally be the one that toppled the king.